It's time for the Your Personal Bank Show with Ference Toth. In an era of chaos, confusion, and craziness, Ference is a voice for common sense. As a financial literacy educator, speaker, and entrepreneur, Ference cuts through the noise to help us understand how current events affect our money, economy, and our freedom. Now, here's Ference Toth.
Welcome to the Your Personal Bank Show. This is Ference. If you want to reach me, you can do so at yourpersonalbank.com. Yes, you will reach me. It's yourpersonalbank.com. So in the news recently has been the Trump-Elon feud. This is a fast-moving situation, and depending on when you listen to this show or if you go to the website yourpersonalbank.com or your personal bank app, a lot could change by the time you listen to this. But I just want to share a few thoughts because I believe both sides have some points. I respect both men. Both are very successful. You have the world's richest man and the world's most powerful man. There's a lot of ego involved. Both have major megaphones. So this is going to be a very, very interesting fight to watch. But the bottom line is it started off with Elon Musk sharing a message on X where he stated, "I'm sorry, but I just can't stand it anymore. This massive, outrageous, pork-filled congressional spending bill is a disgusting abomination." Now, there's some reasons behind what he's saying, and I agree with what he's saying, that the big, beautiful bill, as Trump has named it, has more spending in it than I would certainly like to see, and most Americans, I believe, feel the same way. According to the Congressional Budget Office, the bill is expected to increase budget deficits by $2.7 trillion through 2034, so over the next 10 years. Now, there's some controversy regarding how the CBO is scoring this bill or measuring the costs. I've heard various things. For example, the CBO is not including tariff income. Tariff income is definitely on the rise. I'll share some of those numbers later. Also, the way the CBO counts spending is very wonky and makes it very difficult to really follow. But one of the problems is the big, beautiful bill continues the Trump tax cuts. In other words, it prevents them from expiring, which would have been a tax increase, an increase in the tax brackets for nearly everyone. And there's hardly anyone that I think wants to see a tax increase come up next year, especially after all the inflation we've dealt with over the last several years. The way the CBO scores it, they look at current law, stayed in place, taxes would increase, and therefore the CBO looks at it as a loss of income because the government would receive less if the lower tax rates that we've been enjoying the past 9 years continue permanently. The facts are that every tax cut that has occurred previously has increased government revenues. This is not a political statement. It's a mathematical fact. So the CBO scoring this as a loss of revenues doesn't correspond with history and what's happened every single time previously. For example, when the Trump tax cuts, the tax laws that we're under currently went into effect, the CBO is stating that tax revenue would decline when in fact it went up and went up nearly every year thereafter. Less taxes typically encourages more economic activity, which although the government does tax at a lower rate, they receive more funds overall because of the increased economic activity. So again, the CBO scoring is a little wonky. Is there really 2.7 trillion in increases in spending over the next 10 years? I'm not so sure about that. But on the other side of the coin, I understand where Elon's coming from, and I agree with him as he states the spending in this bill more than defeats all the cost savings achieved by the Doge team at great personal cost and risk. There's no doubt that Elon took on a lot of risk, both to himself personally. He had death threats to his companies. I mean, they were burning Teslas, for gosh sake, because of the stance he made in terms of identifying waste and fraud through Doge. I applaud those efforts. He deserves a lot of credit for doing those things. And I can understand his frustration with this bill, in essence, blowing up Any savings that Doge was able to identify, the spending bill will just spend more, in fact. Also, it has to be really frustrating on Elon's part that so far little or no of the Doge cuts have been codified into law by Congress. It's like a slap in the face. He put a lot of effort. The guy was sleeping on the floor, working massive hours with his team to dig through financial records of the federal government, which is something that's way overdue. Should have been done decades ago, frankly, but it was a brilliant approach of what he was doing and much needed and way overdue to try to identify waste and fraud. The only people that can be against waste, fraud, and theft are those that are benefiting from it directly. This is like a 90-10 issue. Most people are against it. But as Elon goes on to explain, he says, I think the real wake up call for me was seeing that the interest payments on the national debt exceeded the Defense Department budget. I just don't want to see America go bankrupt. And again, he has some very valid points. And that's why Elon is now calling for people to contact their senators and congressmen to kill the bill regarding Trump's big, beautiful bill. Elon wants to eliminate deficit spending. This is not a surprise. It really shouldn't be a shock to anyone. In fact, in one of the recent interviews that Elon did jointly with President Trump, he explained we needed to cut spending, not pass more spending. He went on to explain how to end inflation and drop interest payments. Elon Musk explained, providing the economy grows faster than the money supply, which means you stop the government overspending and the waste. The output of useful goods and services exceed the increase in money supply. Therefore, you have no inflation, and you also drop interest payments that people pay. And Elon went on to explain in the interview that the reason interest payments are so high is because the national debt keeps increasing. The government, I discuss this on this show all the time about the bond market. The government is competing to sell debt with private citizens, which drives up the interest rates. And if you cut back on the deficit, you actually have an amazing situation because you get rid of inflation and you drop interest rates. And this means people's mortgage payments go down, credit card payments, car payments, student loans. Lives become more affordable and the standard of living improves. Elon shared all these things with Trump sitting right next to him in an interview. So this is no secret. And then recently, Elon's gone on to state we should not take American prosperity for granted. We have to reduce the size of government, reduce the spending, and live within our means. I applaud all of those things. In fact, in some respects, I'm really encouraged by all this attention that Elon is bringing to the debt, the deficit, overspending, waste, fraud. These are things that have frustrated me for literally decades. I was frustrated with Bush Jr. by spending too much money. So that gives you an idea how long I've been concerned as a financial person, as a citizen, as a business owner about the debt and the effects it would have. I even heard an interview with Senator Ron Johnson recently where he was asked a question about economic chaos due to the excess government debt, and he stated he was somewhat surprised that it had not really occurred already. And I echo his sentiment to some degree. It does, though, show the fact that our government has been able to spend the record levels it has. We're at 36 trillion, soon to arrive at 37 trillion. We're at about 125% debt to GDP. That's debt to gross domestic product. A way to look at it is gross domestic product is the combined earnings of every U.S. citizen in the country. So it's what we earn as a country, our income. And the debt, of course, is debt. If you apply this, say, to a household, put it in terms that make sense to people, assume you earned $100,000 a year and you had $125,000 a year of debt. I'm sorry, you had $125,000 of debt. Would you be able to maintain that debt? As one of Elon's messages recently pointed out, that about 25% of revenues that the government is receiving is going strictly to interest payments. These are the numbers currently. So, in other words, again, applying it to a typical household in understandable terms. Because when we get into trillions and stuff, people just kind of tune out. It's just these are numbers we cannot comprehend, frankly. But if you apply it to, say, a household earning 100,000 a year, you have 125,000 in debt, and 25,000 a year of your income goes to interest payments on that debt. Now, can you maintain that level of debt? And the answer is yes. You could live on the remaining 75,000 a year. A typical household in America could today, but they wouldn't be able to spend a whole lot more. You start to strain the finances of that household when you approach 30%. We're close to that. And the increasing levels of debt because of the additional deficit spending. This is where Elon has a very valid point, and he's very concerned. You approach that 30% debt to income ratio. Anyone who's ever obtained a mortgage to purchase a home understands that you don't qualify for that mortgage if your debt is above for that home is above 30% of your gross income. It's called debt to income ratio. And the reason is quite simple. If you spend more than 30% of your income on your housing, you don't have enough money to live to cover everything else. And that's why we are not over the cliff yet. I'm not a doomsdayer as a country, but we are rapidly approaching that cliff and we have to stop. And Elon's point is very, very valid about this big, beautiful bill that does not cut spending enough. They talk about a 1 trillion in savings or reductions, and the reality is that's over 10-year period. So it's 150 billion a year in savings out of about 5 trillion in spending. It's a drop in the bucket, folks. It's like 1 or 2 pennies on the dollar, literally. And that's why Elon's so frustrated, and he has a valid reason to do so. Now, there's some other issues involved, though, that President Trump's dealing with in terms of passing this bill, and there are some good things in this bill. And I'm going to encourage you to stay tuned in the next segment because I'm going to get into the points that Trump is making, and some of the things that in this bill are good, and perhaps this argument between the two men will bring enough attention that the bill could be improved upon. That would be the best case scenario. So stay tuned.
Stay tuned for more common sense from Ference. For more information, contact Ference at 866-268-4422 or yourpersonalbank.com. That's 866-268-4422. Welcome back to the Your Personal Bank Show with Ference Toth. Want more information? Contact Ference at 866-268-4422 or yourpersonalbank.com. That's 866-268-4422. Now back to the show with Ference Toth.
Welcome back to the Your Personal Bank Show. This is Ference. If you want to reach me, you can do so at yourpersonalbank.com. Yes, you will reach me. It's yourpersonalbank.com. So President Trump and Elon Musk are having a very strong and very public disagreement about the big, beautiful bill. And Elon's frustrated because he spent 6 months identifying waste, fraud, corruption within the government. He spent millions of his own money helping Republicans get elected up and down the ballot. And Congress has yet to codify any of the budget cuts his team identified into the bill. That is incredibly frustrating. That is why Elon wants to kill the bill. And he faced great personal cost and risk, both to himself personally and his businesses. He had death threats. They were burning Teslas. And it's an absolute travesty that Congress, which is controlled by Republicans, quote unquote, who are very happy to get Elon's support in November, are not codifying these cuts into law. They're counting on economic growth to bail us out of this debt crisis that we're facing. Growth is not guaranteed. Granted, it's likely it'll happen, but again, it's not guaranteed. And spending cuts are right in front of us. Congress has to do better. And if they don't, they deserve to be primaried. I agree with Elon on this. I mean, the reality is government spending pre-COVID was at about $4.5 trillion dollars and is now approaching $7 trillion per year, more than 50% increase. While at that same time, in that 4-year period, we had a 2% increase in population. Why do we need to spend all that extra money? There's really no logical reason, and DOGE identified hundreds of billions of dollars of waste and fraud and corruption, and they're not even done yet in a short time period, and they're not even done yet. There's no reason why the federal government jumped spending from about 4.5 trillion to 6.5 trillion and have kept it there roughly and continued to go up somewhat from that point. If we had some real fiscal responsibility and some real leadership, once COVID was declared over, spending should have gone back down to levels pre-COVID, which would have been about 4.5 trillion. Okay, you could have increased spending by the population growth of 2%. So we should be about 2% higher spending than we were pre-COVID. We had roads, we had a military, we had a border, we had all those things prior to COVID. Things operated just fine. Granted, we have an issue where we had open borders and we have to get rid of many of these illegals for national security reasons and safety reasons, if nothing else. But other than that, I mean, the infrastructure was there prior to COVID, and we didn't have to spend that much. There's no reason that we have to now. Yet Congress has gotten it in their head that they have to continue spending at those levels because, frankly, many of them benefit from it. That's the real story. And to add insult to injury, Trump has recently come out and stated that he wants to eliminate the debt ceiling. Look, I like a lot of the policies of what President Trump has done. Certainly securing the borders, number one. He's been very successful at that. There's no argument there from anyone. He's done a lot of other good things. But this is one thing I have to admit I do not agree with. By eliminating the debt ceiling, you're basically giving Congress a blank check to raise spending at whatever level they choose. This could be very dangerous. I don't trust them, and I think most people don't. Most citizens don't. This would be like you had a credit card and you max out your credit card, you through some spending you should not have done, some reckless spending. You want to eliminate the debt limit and just spend whatever. Nothing good comes of that. So I disagree with President Trump on eliminating the debt ceiling. He's stating it's for reasons because to prevent an economic catastrophe. But the reality is, this is one of the very few limitations that's still placed on Congress in terms of overall spending. My opinion is they would just probably blow out spending and create another catastrophe anyway. It's better we limit their spending and try to prevent that from occurring. They should be forced to spend less. That's what I'm trying to say. And again, this is where I agree with Elon. And I couldn't be happier that he's bringing this such to the forefront. A year ago, almost nobody was talking about the debt. I felt like a voice in the wilderness, so to speak. I brought it up a number of times, and occasionally someone would make a comment or be concerned, but we kind of just went on our own merry way. Well, now Elon's forcing the issue, and that, I believe, long term can lead to some good results. By the way, majority of voters agree with Elon and want the big, beautiful bill trimmed down. Elon left the Democratic Party. He sacrificed a lot by supporting the GOP. Republicans should give his counsel some serious consideration. Let's discuss President Trump's side of things. There are some political realities. Yes, the Republicans do control the Senate and the House, but they are narrow, slim majorities. Not every Republican is a fiscal conservative. Or not every Republican is fiscally responsible. There are some that like to spend. When given an opportunity, the Democrats vote for additional spending nearly 100% of the time. It's very rare that a single Democrat will vote no on additional spending ever. We have some representatives who have an R in front of their name but vote on spending bills much like Democrats. They're certainly not fiscally responsible, and often are referred to as rhinos or Republicans in name only, which means they're really a Democrat. So there definitely are some political realities in the fact of what you can get past. 1.5 trillion in spending cuts, or 150 billion a year for 10 years is what it really is a pathetic amount of cuts considering the spending is upwards of $7 trillion annually. So that's 7,000 billion per year of spending, and you're cutting 1.5 billion. You're cutting 150 billion per year out of nearly 7,000 billion. That's a tiny, tiny percentage. Frankly, it's a joke. I think, despite the fact that Republicans do have a very slim majority, I still believe that their ask is far, far too low. I think they could push for more and obtain it more than a 2% reduction in spending when we're spending about 50% more pre COVID levels just in 4 years. That's pathetic, frankly. There's actually a lot of very good things in the big, beautiful bill, like no tax on tips. It makes the Trump tax cuts permanent. This would have been the largest tax increase in history if allowed to expire. The Democrats they were very vocal about stating that they would allow the Trump tax cuts to expire if they had gained control of Congress or the presidency. It would have increased the tax brackets on nearly everyone. The last thing we need is a tax increase, especially after dealing with all of the inflation that we dealt with over the past few years. No tax on tips, no tax on overtime. These are positive things and things that Trump promised in his campaign. It eliminates Medicaid for illegals. They should not be receiving Medicaid. It's illegal for them to do so. The fact we even need to make a law for this is a joke, frankly. But it also protects Medicaid for those that are the most vulnerable. That's what it's for. The citizens who cannot afford insurance or income is too low, health insurance that is, Medicaid will provide that. And by taking off millions of illegals off the Medicaid rolls, it helps ensure it stays funded for those people. This is a good thing. And look, if you're able bodied, you should not be receiving welfare. There's a work requirement. That is a good thing. The big, beautiful bill also funds additional ICE agents. Did you know that ICE was one of the very few government agencies that has not increased in size or budget over the past 20 years? And what's ironic is protection of our border and our citizens is one of the actual jobs that the government is supposed to do. That's one of its essential things. The big, beautiful bill slashes IRS funding. No more 87,000 agents or so that were supposed to be hired that the Democrats passed. It repeals DEI mandates, the Green New Deal, bans gender ideology in federal agencies, and raises military pay. Again, there's a lot of great stuff involved with this bill. There's school choice credits. There's voter ID mandates for federal elections. It restarts the Keystone Pipeline and gives tax breaks for adoption and large families. There's a lot to like about this bill. Now, I've heard some people discuss breaking it up into pieces, but I've also heard if you do that, Senate rules require a 60 vote majority. Now, I'm not a Senate parliamentarian and an expert in all that. I've heard some conflicting stories on that. This is the part where Trump may have a point. I agree the government needs to spend less money. Well, the Senate Parliament rules are very convoluted. And I'm definitely not an expert, but I've heard and been told that this is a reconciliation bill and that budget bills will be coming up later because a reconciliation bill is really not structured due to rules in the Senate to do much in the way of cutting expenses or cutting spending and only needs a 50 vote threshold to pass. I'm not 100% certain about that because there are a number of things in here that do reduce spending. So I'm not sure why, if you can cut the green energy mandate, why couldn't you cut other things? I think there's a little bit of disingenuousness going on. So I think Elon has a point. Also, how many times have we been told, well, the spending cuts and all that will come later? We've heard that story before. Now, I hope it is the case. And with Trump, he does tend to follow through on what he says he's going to do. I believe him regarding that. And that this is a 2 or 3 step process. But I think that needs to be expressed more clearly if that is indeed the case. Stay tuned in the next segment. I'm going to discuss a few more things about the big, beautiful bill and why we should push back on this and hopefully get something better.
Stay tuned for more common sense from Ference. For more information, contact Ference at 866-268-4422 or yourpersonalbank.com. That's 866-268-4422. Welcome back to the Your Personal Bank Show with Ference Toth. Want more information? Contact Ference at 866-268-4422 or yourpersonalbank.com. That's 866-268-4422. Now back to the show with Ference Toth.
Welcome back to the Your Personal Bank Show. This is Ference. If you want to contact me, you can do so at yourpersonalbank.com. Yes, you will reach me. It's yourpersonalbank.com. So I've been discussing a lot about this big, beautiful bill, the argument that President Trump and Elon Musk are having back and forth. The parts that I don't like about it is where it's gotten personal. You got two very powerful men, very large egos. Kind of have to have that, though, to run multi-billion-dollar companies or be the president of the United States. But the fact that they're attacking each other on a personal level after working together so effectively before, I find that frustrating. But I do believe some good can come of this because Elon's point is he's bringing up into everybody's face and making it impossible to ignore is the deficit spending, the level of spending and debt that we have as a country. This needs to be addressed. And I'm hopeful that by bringing this to the public forum and making it so that Congress people cannot ignore the issue, that we might get a better bill out of all of this. Again, and as I shared in the last segment, there's a lot to like about this bill. Border enforcement and no tax on tips and making the Trump tax cuts permanent. These are all good things, but I do believe, I agree with Elon in this regard, I do believe that additional spending cuts could be implemented in this bill, and hopefully we'll end up with something better. I don't know that he's going about it necessarily the best way, but if it gets the job done, so be it. Again, I know there's some political realities involved, but I would like to see Trump and the Republicans be more bold about spending cuts. This is what the vast majority of Americans want. I saw this post and I thought it was so appropriate. It's like, earn it, taxed, spend it, taxed, save it, taxed, invest it, taxed, own it, taxed, sell it, taxed, live in it, taxed, drive it, taxed, eat, drink, smoke it, taxed, gift it, taxed, die, taxed. Meanwhile, they waste it. Our wallets are bleeding. Our future is being drained. This isn't just taxation, but it's exploitation. It's time to draw the line, and enough is enough. And this is where Elon is correct. And this isn't a political thing. This is not a fault of one party or the other. It has been a problem that's been ongoing. The debt continues to rise regardless of who is in the White House or what political party is in charge. If you look at a debt chart, all it does is continue to rise, and it continues to rise at a faster rate. It's accelerating. Again, Elon shared that we are spending about 25% of government revenues interest on the debt alone. That is approaching a level that becomes unsustainable. 30% is sort of used as a rule of thumb. You can apply this to when you purchase a home with a mortgage. A 30% debt to income ratio. Anything above that, you don't qualify for the mortgage because you don't earn enough income to cover the debt, to cover the expense. Government's no different. Remember, government has no money. None. They get it from taxpayers or they print it. So it's our money they're spending or wasting, or they're printing more, which creates more inflation. And here's another way to look at it. It took 220 years for total U.S. debt to reach $12 trillion. And just in the last 4 years alone, the U.S. has added another 12 trillion to the debt. When you start looking at things like that, it starts to put it in perspective. In the past 4 years, health and human services spending went from 1.2 to 1.7 trillion annually. Treasury spending doubled. Deficits exploded by 86%. This isn't governance, this is generational theft. And a few specific examples. Doge recently uncovered a $4.9 million grant to an NGO that didn't add up. As they dug into it further, they found out that this company is owned by none other than Hunter Biden. The grant program was USAID for Ukraine. There's no record of where the money went or what it was spent on. So Doge found a $4.9 million grant given to Hunter Biden. And he's not the only one. Members of Congress are exempt from Obamacare, vaccine mandates, insider trading crimes. They're exempt from the Freedom of Information Act, FISA, warrantless spying. Members of Congress are exempt from term limits. They create wars but never participate in them. They only profit from them. It's time we realize Congress here is the real problem. And let me give you another personal example. If you make a cash deposit in a bank of excess of $10,000, you have to prove to the bank that you're not doing anything illegal while they freeze your account for up to 2 weeks. Meanwhile, elected officials make millions on low six-figure salaries, and we're not allowed to question why. And recently, Senator Lindsey Graham spent over $400,000 on a hotel bill alone in Ukraine. Guess who approved the expense? The chairman of the Senate Budget Committee, who happens to be Lindsey Graham. Because of the uproar and the attention, Republicans are now calling for Senator Lindsey Graham to repay the hundreds of thousands of dollars of taxpayer funds he used for his trip to Ukraine that he proved for himself. But some of the latest financial reports state that Senator Lindsey Graham and Blumenthal's trip to Ukraine recently cost approximately $25 million when you include airfare, security, and everything. What's frustrating about this is congressional House members have no international responsibilities in their job descriptions. There's no reason whatsoever for any of them to take an official, quote unquote, trip outside the United States on the taxpayer's dime ever. Now, senators do have some international negotiations regarding trade, but none of them should be traveling to a war zone, especially where there are no official U.S. troops involved. So the fact that Elon and many people are now pushing back on this bill, I don't see a problem with that. In fact, I think we should. I know there's some people out there saying, well, this is the best we can get and we should take what we have. But they don't really say why we shouldn't push for more when this may be our best and possibly only chance in a generation to do so. We do have a president that's willing to cut spending, and Congress, on a nominal level, state they want to do so. Just like politicians, we need to dig in our heels. Because if we don't, the only way to solve this is to vote them out. Because in many ways, they're like ticks that are dug in on a hound. We've got to aggressively get rid of them if they won't do their jobs and represent the people, and instead continue destroy our financial future by driving us off a cliff of debt. And debt could have some really, really long-term implications, especially for a country. Let me give you an example. Many people don't know the history of how slavery ultimately became illegal in the Western world. But England passed a law called the Slavery Abolition Act of 1833 to compensate slave owners for the loss of their property. At the time, the British government borrowed 20 million pounds, which was equivalent to about 40% of its annual budget at the time. This was a huge expense on their part to eliminate slavery in their country. The vast majority of those funds were loaned by the Rothschild bankers, and the loan was administered by the Bank of England. Now, this occurred in 1833. Do you have any idea when that loan was finally paid off to slave owners in England for their quote unquote property? You might be surprised to find out that that loan was finally paid off in 2015. It took nearly 200 years to pay back that loan. Now, morally, it was the right thing to do. The money we're spending as a country is not so high minded. In fact, a lot of it is waste and fraud and abuse, and is just paying for criminal activity, frankly. If we don't draw a line, like Elon is trying to do, and say enough's enough, we'll get into a point where we will have to finance paying back the interest on a loan for the next 200 years, much like England had to do to pay back slave owners to abolish slavery in England in 1833. We need to get back to the four essential functions of government. And this is according to Milton Friedman, who, if you're not familiar with him, is one of the top economists in history. The four essential functions of government are defense from foreign enemies, protect the individual citizen from abuse or coercion by other citizens, define the rules, in other words, what are the rules of the game for economic purposes, and provide a judicial system, which is a mechanism for adjudicating disputes regarding the meaning of the rules. Anything outside of those four areas is outside government's core competence or responsibility. So if it doesn't fit one of those four, they shouldn't be doing it, which means they shouldn't be spending money on it. That's how you cut back. Stay tuned in the last segment. I do need to discuss some things about what's going on with the bond market. There's a lot of news in that, and in the bond and real estate markets. There's a lot of news going on right there, so I encourage you to stay tuned.
Stay tuned for more common sense from Ferens. For more information, contact Ferens at 866-268-4422 or yourpersonalbank.com. That's 866-268-4422. Welcome back to the Your Personal Bank Show with Ferens Toth. Want more information? Contact Ferens at 866-268-4422 or yourpersonalbank.com. That's 866-268-4422. Now back to the show with Ferens Toth.
Welcome back to the Your Personal Bank Show. This is Ferens. If you want to contact me, you can do so at yourpersonalbank.com. Yes, you will reach me. It's yourpersonalbank.com. So there's been some news in the bond markets recently, and one of the issues happens to deal with Japan. Now, I don't discuss a lot about international markets, but I think this is important because Japan, I believe, is serving as a warning sign for us regarding the government debt. And here's what I mean by this. Over the past few years, Japan's 30-year government bonds have lost nearly half of their value. This is all while at the same time their yield or interest they're paying has increased, much like our own. The reason for concern is the Bank of Japan owns about half of their government debt or their bonds. Recently, they've signaled that they're going to reduce their purchases. This is creating a lot of concern in the bond market for Japan. And this is a warning to us and the rest of the world, any country that has a significant amount of debt. Their interest is rising, yields are rising on the bonds, yet demand is declining or crumbling. And this is a case study in what happens when investors, bond buyers, lose patience with massive debt. The appetite for long term Japanese debt is evaporating. Bond buyers are concerned about Japan's ability to pay the interest on those bonds. In their 20-year auction recently, Japan's 20-year auction recently was the worst since 2012. And this is despite the fact Japan has announced that they're going to, Japan's equivalent of their Treasury Department has announced they're going to scale back selling longer term Japanese bonds. So they're going to provide less supply, yet the demand is still declining. So the bottom line, while interest or yield is surging, demand is evaporating. So the bottom line, as yields have increased to record highs, demand is disappearing. And the real concern is Japan's debt to GDP is 260%. It's the highest of any industrialized country in the world. And the Bank of Japan owns about half of the outstanding government bonds. The bottom line is they were buying much of their own debt because no one else would buy it. Well, you can only do that for so long. Eventually, it all comes to a head. The bottom line problem is there's too much supply, too much debt, too much spending, and not enough demand, not enough buyers. Eventually, if the bond buyers quit purchasing the bonds, the government is then forced to live within its means. It's called austerity measures. We saw that 15 years ago in Greece. Financially, in the long run, it turns out to be a good thing. Living within your means is actually a positive thing. Going from a high debt situation, transitioning to that is very chaotic. And it's ironic how only in government, if a politician or a bureaucrat or somebody says common sense things like we should balance our budget, we shouldn't spend more than we receive, we should pay down debt, is that considered too conservative or too radical? In your household, in your business, that's normal course of action. If we all know if you spend too much money and you have too much debt for too long a period of time, that leads to financial catastrophe. The federal government is able to extend that further and longer than the typical household or business, but eventually that comes crashing down too. It's not that the federal government's going to default on its debt. And why I say that is our federal government doesn't have a revenue problem. They have a spending problem. In other words, they're receiving record revenues. They're receiving upwards of $5 trillion a year in revenue. The problem is they're spending about $7 trillion a year. And again, if our government cut back spending by $2 trillion a year, which means they would be living within their means, stop adding to the deficit, stop adding to the debt, that would be a very good thing, by the way, financially. We would all be fine. And I know that because our government was spending less than that, about $4.5 trillion prior to COVID, and we were all fine. So there's a lot of people getting really worked up and getting excited and nervous about a lot of things, but the reality is we're just spending too much and we got to cut it out. And that's where Elon is right. By the way, there is some good news on the horizon. Turns out tariff revenue in May hit another record, $22 billion, following a record of $16 billion in April. So tariff income has more than doubled in the last 2 months. It now reflects 4% of the total federal revenue, which is double of last year's already just in 2 months. So the government can bring in a significant amount of revenue through tariffs if it continues down this path, which can help alleviate some of the deficit problems. But the reality is they're still spending too much. They need to cut back more than they are. Obvious question is, what do you do about all this? As obvious as it is that the government needs to stop spending too much, so far, like ticks on a hound, the people in charge are dug in. They're unwilling to give this up, and they're fighting every step of the way. So this is going to probably be a process over a period of time, over several years at least. Fortunately, I believe we have that 5 to 10 years. Again, if we're at 125 GDP to debt, as long as we don't go over that 30% mark, we'll most likely be okay. But we do need to address the problem. But it also means, as you were seeing in Japan and in our own country, bond yields, bond interest rates are going to stay on the higher side because of all this record debt that's being spent and refinanced. Because when a bond expires, the government doesn't pay it down, they just resell it at the new interest rate. So again, there's a record amount of debt being offered, which is pushing the prices up, the interest rates up. How do you get these bond buyers to entice them to buy? You have to increase the interest rate. The government's lack of financial responsibility creates an opportunity. And this is where I've been getting a lot of people reaching out to me lately, because this isn't going to go away anytime soon. And this, again, is where Elon and President Trump's discussion is so valuable, is bringing this to people's attention. Higher for longer is the new reality. We're going to have higher interest rates for longer. And as more and more people realize this, more and more people are going to understand that this is the golden era of fixed assets, and likely will be for the next 5 to 10 years. Not me saying that. That's JP Morgan, Vanguard, BlackRock, you name it. The fact of the matter is, a lot of the analysts are projecting that fixed assets like annuities, your personal bank dividends, and guaranteed income riders will outperform the S&P 500 for the next 5 to 10 years. Certainly it'll do so with a lot less risk. I can show you how to have more liquidity and reduce your taxes on top of it. Shifting a portion of your portfolio, given the situation we're in with the debt, the bond market, etc., only makes logical sense. More and more people are becoming aware of this. More are becoming concerned, rightly so. I shared in previous shows where many of the institutional buyers are shifting their purchases from the stock market or their investments from the stock to the bond markets. Those are the big movers, the big money players. I don't think anyone can disagree that stock valuations are inflated. I don't know how many times I have to say this. I'm not saying this to be Chicken Little and the sky is falling. That the economy has changed, the interest rate environment has changed, the bond market has changed, the stock market has changed, profits with companies have changed. It costs more to borrow money and grow business. It's just a lot of people out there don't know it yet. And it's kind of like a game of musical chairs. Do you want to be the one left without a chair? I know what you've done for many of you has been working, and it creates a comfort zone. It creates a complacency, and people get comfortable. They get in a comfort zone, and it's hard to make a change before the crisis happens. I've seen 3 stock market corrections in my career. It's my 25th year. I'm always steadily busy. I get swamped when the markets take a big downturn because I deal with guaranteed, safe, insured monies and highly liquid. People know that, and they reach out to me as a result. But then I see those situations, and it's sad, where they've lost 10 or 20 or more percent of their portfolio value already, and now they're afraid because they're afraid of losing more. You don't have to be that person, or at least protect a portion of it. If all these analysts are correct, and fixed assets like annuities, guaranteed lifetime income riders, dividends with insurance companies are going to be outperform the S&P 500, would it make wise to take advantage of that? Eliminate the market risk on that portion of your monies? It just only makes sense. If you want more information, contact me at yourpersonalbank.com. Stay tuned to next week's show for more great information. And as long as it's on our money, in God we trust.
Listen Tuesdays at noon and Saturdays at 1 to the Your Personal Bank Show for more information. Contact Ference at 866-268-4422 or yourpersonalbank.com. That's 866-268-4422. This show is designed to provide accurate and authoritative information. The presenter and guests of this program do not engage in legal, accounting, or tax advice. Professional advice regarding your situation should be sought if required. Some products discussed may have limitations and not be available in all states. Excessive unpaid loans may affect performance. Distributions may become taxable if not managed properly. Replacements may not be suitable for everyone. There may be charges when replacing coverage. Dividend rates and bank line of credit rates may change. For current rates, contact Ference at 866-268-4422 or yourpersonalbank.com. Again, that's 866-268-4422 or yourpersonalbank.com.